Hello everyone. Let's sit tall and close the eyes. Take a nice breath in and a nice breath out. And just allow yourself to gather your energies, to feel the inherent blessing of the inhale and the exhale, all that they represent, from the process of life to the experience of being, to the potential of peace. Allow yourself to be so vast in your awareness that not only do you recognize all the benefits and blessings of each breath, but you also embody each and every one of them without resistance, without hesitation, without worry or doubt. And then drawing the hands together in front of the heart. We'll lift our voices in one Om, followed by the invocation mantras. Taking a breath in. Om. Shri Guru Bhyo Namaha. Hari Om. Ganana Antva Ganapati Gum Havamahe Kavin Kavinam Upamashravastamam Jesta Rajam Brahmanan Brahmanaspata Anashrin Vanuti Bisidha Sadhanam Mahaganapataye Namaha Prano Devi Saraswati Vajebhir Vajenivati Dhinama Vitriyavatu Ano Divo Brhataf Parvata Da Saraswati Ajata Gantu Yagnyam Havan Devi Jujushana Gritachi Shagmam Nova Chamushati Shrinotu Vagdevyai Namaha. And gently releasing the hands down and fluttering the eyes open. Thank you to each of you for being here today. I'm over here in Ireland, and it is an Irish day today. It's almost dark out already, and it's only 4:30, and it's raining. And it's windy, but it's actually fairly warm out there. So it's just that time of the year, what they call winter here. And it will get chilly, but not cold like it is in the US typically. It's just the rain and the wind that makes it seem so. So it's been a quiet day, and I've been contemplating on what we would talk about today. And so, of course, yoga. So let's go there, shall we? Oftentimes, students, even experienced students, don't realize, or perhaps they have forgotten, some may have never been introduced to the idea that there are actually stages in our yogic development. There are stages to the benefits of yoga. And they're not concrete steps that cannot be shifted and adjusted according to our experience. What they are 17 constantly repeating experiences that we will have along this journey that we can utilize as a measure of the proficiency of this practice and the promise of this practice. And what I mean by that is that each of these 7 stages have levels and layers to them. They have tiers to them. Sometimes they'll be on a slightly more shallow level of understanding and experience, and other times they'll seem very deep and very profound. So they're not a hierarchy of experiences. They are a diversity of experiences that we will have over and over again as we choose to decide to go deeper into these practices. And the very first step or stage, as it were, of yoga is probably the one that most students are most familiar with, and that's self-awareness. And so self-awareness comes first just by the practice of paying attention on purpose. So, you go into your yoga class. Some of you were potentially in class with Dayananda this morning, and he probably led you through some postures. And as you were in those postures, you perhaps had some keen awarenesses, things that maybe you were not aware of previously. Maybe the way that your body felt, whether it was tension or release, whether your mind was holding on to something or releasing something. Perhaps it was a keen awareness, a paying attention on purpose to the ability to both make the decision to stay in something comfortable while also choosing peace in that moment. So whether we're talking about the asana or our initial dive into the ethics of yoga, the yamas and the niyamas, particularly certain ones of those, this self-awareness comes about as a result of paying attention on purpose. The very first yama, ahimsa, non-violence, we hear that perhaps in our yoga class, or if we pick up the Bhagavad Gita or some other scripture, it's mentioned in there. And we say, oh, what does that have to do with me? And that question automatically begins the inquiry. The question must now be answered. And on the first level of the answer, we acquire self-awareness about what non-violence means to us. What in this moment does it mean to us? How do we carry that concept forward in our day? Most oftentimes, when we think of non-violence, we think first of nobody should hurt me. And second, I shouldn't hurt anybody else who hasn't asked for it. Yeah? Who hasn't hurt me in some way. So there is on that kind of superficial level, there is a justification of nonviolence. But with self-awareness comes depth. And eventually that first level is no longer enough. We recognize that there is something deeper there, something more profound. And we start asking questions. Well, if someone punches me, is it okay if I punch them back? If someone gossips about me, is it okay if I gossip back? Is it okay to eat meat? And these are all questions, and there's so many of them, that we have to carry for a period of time in our practice and come to a resolution within ourselves, not because a teacher told us to, but because we have actually come to peace within ourself over the discrepancy of the question. Does that make sense? Like, I can certainly give you a whole bunch of shoulda, woulda, couldas, but unless you come to the intention yourself, you come to the place of pure peace with the answer, what I really have to say doesn't mean too much. It'll be a pacification at best, a crutch, if you will. You're the one that has to do the work of accepting whatever your decision is. And that's your free will, you know? So this self-awareness comes by way of a full-blown inquiry into our own free will, the practice of ethics as we choose to practice them, and whatever other consequences or questions that come along with that. And so we really we need to be fully invested in satya, the third yama, truthfulness. We need to be truly fully invested in the truth and less invested in how well we can cover up our own preferences and behaviors by way of excuses and justifications. So you see how this gets pretty complicated right off the bat. Right? It's such an amazing thing to think about. You know, today's consumerist world would have you think that self-awareness is available for $79.99, a quick YouTube video, and a really nice Manduka yoga mat. And I'm not saying that those things might not be some kind of tools for you to use outside of the $79.99 special. But the real work, the real inquiry is you. You are all that is necessary. You don't need anything else, including a pen or paper. What you need is the ability to sit with yourself, to investigate how you feel, to pay attention to how certain actions trigger you, cause you to react, cause you to respond, call you to inquire even deeper, and then to listen to that inner voice within that is telling you the answer already. That's the voice that you've shut down over the years because life hasn't been easy, because life has actually been rather traumatic for 99.999% of people, you know. We all carry our triggers and our traumas forward with us to some degree. And then we unknowingly, mostly, but sometimes knowingly, use those traumas and triggers as an excuse to not go deeper, to not really listen. Well, that voice didn't tell me the truth before. And it's like, well, actually, if you dive in deep, you'll find it certainly did, but you might not have been listening, or perhaps you were just choosing something else to listen to. So you need to go deep into your own self-inquiry and ask yourself, where do the ethics lie in my life? Where is the boundary of my self-awareness? Where do I say no thank you versus yes please? Where am I willing to venture with this? And then just accept the answers, you know? So if you're at a point in your life right now where you're like, well, you know, self-awareness is all kinds of great and everything like that, and it does bring me some peace, but I'm not really ready to go into those other deeper questions of radical self-responsibility. Not quite prepped for that yet, so I'm going to wait a while. That's perfectly fine, as long as you're honest with yourself about it. You don't violate the virtue of truth within your own self and within your own self-inquiry. It's okay to say, I'm not ready to go there. And it's okay to say, I don't even want to go there right now. I don't even want to. That's fine. But when you say, that place has no importance to me, that's a bunch of hogwash, I am living in my truth, even though you on some level know that you might not be, that is not conducive to your spiritual path. So this self-awareness automatically opens up so much for us. And that very first one, which we haven't even exhausted yet, has taken up the first 15 minutes of the satsang, you know. So just think of how much deeper we could go. And maybe what we'll do is, after introducing these 7 today, maybe then we'll do a satsang for each one individually so that we can go deeper into each one, because they are each that important. The first thing to know, and perhaps the second thing to know about this first stage of yoga, is that it is absolutely only accessible to the degree that you commit yourself to an ethical inquiry and a sincere practice of truthfulness regarding your own behaviors, regarding the behaviors that you have committed yourself to. So whatever level you're ready to go to there is the level of self-awareness that you will eventually achieve. So in order to get the deepest level of self-awareness, you've got to take the deep dive. You have to move away from the shallower end of the pool and take the chance. And that can be really uncomfortable. But what waits for you in that deeper end of the pool, through the practice of svadhyaya. Svadhyaya is one of the niyamas, and it means self-study. What is waiting for you really in either end of the pool, but more so in the deeper end, is self-understanding. Self-understanding. We walk around our life a lot of the time, a bit out of sorts. We say, why don't people understand me? Why doesn't anybody get me? Why don't people understand how I'm feeling, what I'm going through? Why do they always expect so much from me? And then somebody will inevitably try to explain to you, they're just not paying attention, or they're just trying to tell you what's... But really, the answer to that question is, you don't know yourself. How on earth do you expect anybody else to know you? You have not committed to svadhyaya, to self-study. So if you don't know yourself, what impressions are you giving out to other people to respond and react to? Is your own confusion over your own self. So self-understanding, the second stage of yoga, comes by way of diving into that water a little bit and saying, you know what, I want to discover more about myself, who I believe I am, who I tell myself I am, and who I really might be. I want to investigate that a little bit more. And so within svadhyaya, there's many different ways to commit oneself to this inquiry. The first and most practical is just by watching yourself, is by speaking less and watching more, by paying attention to how you react and respond to certain situations, paying attention to those things that trigger you, as well as those things that bring you peace. Understanding raga and devesha, attachment and aversion, and the role that they play in your life. How committed are you to attachment? And how committed are you to aversion? And what do these two qualities do to you day in and day out that alter the very character of your peaceful being? Because basically we all give our power away to them. We like something so much that we forget the lessons of the past and the intentions for the future. We hate something so much, same thing happens. So the attachment and the aversion, they drive us so emphatically towards suffering. And in that state of suffering, there's not such a great chance of self-understanding. Why? Because we're suffering. And our first concern as we exist in that state of suffering is to get out of it, to avoid it, its continuation as best as possible, and to attach to something better, something better. And that's a misunderstanding in yoga, as well as many similar traditions like Buddhism. People think, well, if I start meditating, I won't suffer anymore. But the reality is, if you start meditating, you'll probably suffer a little more at first. And not probably, you will. And the reason why you will is because you have to learn how to meditate. And that means sitting with that which makes you really uncomfortable. And then learning how to somehow be stronger in yourself than that emotion, experience, trigger seems to be to you. And then embracing that discomfort in such a way that takes your power back from it. And therein lies the battle of the ego. The ego says, no way, I am not letting go of that story. It's too good of a story. I've got too much going on there. But the heart says, you have to let go of the story if you ever want to find the larger truth. You have to let go of the story. And so that's like tearing off Band-Aids, and that could be really painful. So when we come into this practice of self-study by way of meditation, or any spiritual practice really, initially it will cause us to suffer a little bit more on some levels, because it will seem uncomfortable, unnecessary, unrealistic, disturbing, and jolting, because our fantasy perspective of, well, if I meditate, I'll simply be at peace, is going to be crushed, right? What does happen eventually is that through the practice of meditation and any other spiritual practice that you adopt, you will learn about the resiliency that you are capable of to sit in the face of the fire, to sit in the face of it, and to bear it and to not react to it so much. That comes over time. Initially, it's more of a grouping. It's I'm not going to react to this no matter what. And so you try to force yourself, and that won't work for very long. And then you say, well, then I just give up. But that won't work either, because it can't just be I give up. And it can't be I'm going to make this happen. Self-understanding comes through acceptance. This is painful. This is hurting my ego. Like my ego doesn't even know what to do with it. And therefore, my tendencies, my habitual behaviors are jumping forward like sparks out of the fire, trying to burn me into some kind of a reaction. And I need to sit here with those embers of flame and just be with them and pay attention as they burn themselves out, rather than giving them my oxygen and letting them burn continually into the future. We have to be the one that is settled, learning about ourselves as a consequence of that settledness, and learning about the truth of acceptance, what it really is. Does that make sense to some degree? Yeah, it's pretty intense, isn't it? I go, oh, I know. It really is. It really is. But that's okay. And you know why? Because this life is intense, don't you think? Everything that has led you up into this moment, can you say you've had zero intensity in your life? Of course not. You've had more intensity than you know what to do with. And you'll keep having that, whether you meditate or not, But the meditation will eventually lead you to a place where you have a different relationship with the intensity, where you can accept it more for what it is. And you won't feel so much like you have to jump into reaction all the time over whatever the discomfort happens to be. You'll find over time that you can actually allow people to be who they are, that you don't have to invest so much of your energy into their mistakes, into their expectations, into their stories, and into your own. And so that leads us to the third. So the third stage of yoga is this concept of acceptance of the self. So now not only do I have this understanding, because understanding can be a little tricky. Understanding can become quite logical in nature, quite analytical. Well, I get it. I read the Bhagavad Gita. I understand. Krishna told Arjuna this, and for us that means this. We can become logically embedded in our understanding, but we need to apply that understanding in our life. Without application, it really doesn't mean a whole lot, other than maybe a great conversation with others who have done similar studies. In this third stage of acceptance, it means that we are applying the understanding. We are actually applying it. We are putting it into a place of day in and day out utilization. We're saying, you know what? I now understand that my trigger tends to be this, and so I am actively going to engage in that in such a way that no longer empowers that trigger, and instead sits with it and offers my inner child or my inner self or my wounded soul, whatever words you would like to put to that. I'm going to offer that the energy that I usually expend in my reactions instead. I'm going to rein it in, and I'm going to apply what I have learned to the healing of my very own self, because I'm no longer trying to hide the fact that I am, on many levels, a broken person, an injured person, a traumatized person, a person who has lost faith, a person who is seeking but who's having trouble finding what it is that I'm seeking, in large part because we haven't put a name to it during our queries. And so what this means in some part is that for a portion of our inquiry, a portion of our path, we actually spend more time trying to convince ourselves that we have self-acceptance than we do actually practicing it. We try to convince ourselves that we have self-knowledge, that we have self-transcendence, that we have self-discipline and all these other things. Much more time trying to convince ourselves of it than actually practicing it. The self-acceptance is like that pivotal moment when we put the understanding into practice. We put the knowledge into the practice. When we take it from a place of logical information into practical application. It's the bridge. Absolutely. 100% the bridge. In self-acceptance, we don't mind the discomfort so much. We don't mind the idea that some things are going to be downright hard. Some things in this life are going to be traumatizing. Some things in this life are going to seem impossible, to appear to be insurmountable. In self-acceptance, we don't mind that so much because we understand on some level that there has never been a difficult moment encountered yet that we have not been able to make our way through. We didn't enjoy the process. We didn't want to be in the process, but we still made our way through it. And therefore, it's highly likely that we will make our way through every other situation we find ourselves in. Now, some of you might be having the hair on the back of your neck go up a little bit right now because you can envision in your mind some situation you won't make your way through. And my question to you is, how are you defining that? Are you defining make your way through it as being something that creates happiness in the ego? A continuation of this life as you think you know it? Or are you looking at make your way through it as an opportunity to come to peace with yourself, no matter what it entails? The continuation of this life, the end of this human life as you know it, the continuation of a sense of peacefulness within yourself versus the disruption that the world is constantly offering you. When we say we will make our way through it, what we're saying is we will make our way through it. Whatever this soul is meant to experience will continue on in spite of what the ego feels about it. And in the tradition, there's this thing called reincarnation. So if the first thing that jumps to the front of the mind is, well, what about death? Then we know that that's abhinivesha, that's triggering the ego. The fear of death and dying, the fear of the end is triggering, but there really is no end. There's no end to the soul. The soul is eternal according to these teachings. And your soul will continue on through the process of reincarnation. So there really is no end. You just might not be wearing this human jacket that you're wearing right now. And for some people that brings great comfort, and for others it's very scary. And that's part of the inquiry that we each have to go through, is to come to understand that second stage of yoga, self-understanding, includes that eternality of the soul, the continuation of the spirit beyond what we perceive in this tiny little box we've made for ourselves to be life. Life does not begin and end in this linear plane of birthday and death day. It goes on. It continues. That's a whole nother satsang, or maybe many. Is this all making sense so far? Yeah? So self-acceptance is the third stage. And that self-acceptance really comes with a lot. And another aspect of that stage of yoga, at any one of these stages, we can be like facing the scarecrow in The Wizard of Oz, and he's got his arms going off into different directions, and he's like, you can go over here and go find the wizard, or you can go over here and go back to Kansas. It's really your choice. Which way do you want to go? Do you want to face the poison apples of the witch's forest, or do you want to go and check out the poppies? Wherever it is that you're going to go. And in this self-acceptance, there is this pivotal moment where we say, I've accepted enough. I don't want to accept anymore. And fear takes hold. Or we see our fear for what it is. And we say, I'm going to meditate more, chant more, practice more, inquire more, until I take apart this fear one piece at a time and find myself in freedom rather than bondage. So the self-acceptance is loaded with triggers, loaded with them. But they don't have to be triggers that call us to any significant return to past behaviors and tendencies. It doesn't have to be. For a lot of people it will be, but it doesn't have to be. We can continue with the practices out of mere curiosity and find out exactly how strong we actually are, exactly how courageous and brave we actually have the ability to be, exactly how compassionate we can become, exactly how present, we can allow ourselves to be, and how whole we can experience ourselves as. But in order to do that, we kind of need stage 4, which intermingles with stage 3, and that's self-discipline. So absolutely, we come to self-discipline the moment we make a decision to get on this path. To step onto this path of practice requires a certain level of discipline, but to stay on it requires an even greater level of discipline, especially as all these things come forward, the fears and the uncomfortableness and the I'm tired of having to deal with this over and over and over again. Shouldn't it be done already? Well, that all depends on how many triggers have formed around it, how many resistances, how many allowances have surrounded a particular trigger or trauma. It is the onion. It absolutely is. And we can spend the rest of this life and many more lifetimes going through each and every one of those layers of triggers, those layers of consequences that a single trauma bring about. So the question is not how quickly can I get myself past this or away from this, but how embedded can I allow myself to become in the work in spite of my fears, in spite of my hesitations, my resistance, in spite of my ignorance. How disciplined can I be about showing up every morning at 5 a.m. for my yoga practice, my meditation, my chanting, if not 5 a.m. at the latest 6 a.m. How disciplined can I be? Look at y'all smiling. How disciplined can I be about getting onto that yoga mat or that meditation cushion? How disciplined can I be when it comes to not cursing other people, not harming them with gossip? How disciplined can I be about my own triggers, not giving in to them, not giving way? How disciplined can I be? So this self-discipline starts, yes, absolutely, from the moment you decide, I am going to step onto this path. But then the real discipline is called forth in staying on the path, making your way forward. Self-discipline is a form of self-study also, as you encounter the resistances to the discipline itself. And the first one of those resistances is but I want people to like me. I want people to think I'm nice. I want people to see me in a certain light. And if I am too disciplined, they won't see me that way. They'll see me as cold, hard, unapproachable. We talk ourselves into believing that discipline is actually not an okay thing, that it's cold and hard and not something that people will look at with any great envy or appreciation. And, well, the truth of the matter is, some of the time you may be quite right about that. Some people will look at your practice of discipline and be afraid of it. They will look at it and say, oh, I'm not doing that. I'm not capable of doing that. I'm not ready for that. How can you do that? Go to the bar. Come on, let's go have a drink. Let's go smoke a joint. Let's go do something that takes our mind off of all of this silly spiritual growth stuff. And then you'll be lured. You'll be lured into a moment where you have to choose by way of discipline to either maintain your discipline or to put it off to the side for a more convenient time by way of no discipline. So, oh boy, there's so much here, isn't there? Discipline itself is such a huge thing on this path. Discipline through self-study means that we acquire skill, the skill to maintain whatever intention it is that we have brought forth for ourselves, the skill to sit with that first reaction to suffering, no matter where it's coming from. The skill to acknowledge that our first impression of happiness may not be the accurate impression of happiness. It may be quite egotistical in nature. The skill to wait it out and to have faith in the waiting, that there is some deeper level of truth right around the corner, right there, waiting for us to open our eyes to it. The skill to sit close to that fire in the midst of all the sparks that it's throwing out at us. The skill to sit as one of those sparks may land on the back of our hand and be a little uncomfortable. The skill to sit and to wait, to have faith in the waiting, as Rumi says in his beautiful poetry. That essence of discipline, the ability to utilize our willpower in such a way that it allows us to stay with the process, that is a skill that is inherent to yoga and necessary to it. The building of willpower, the discipline to stay, so very important. And then these first 4 levels of stages, self-awareness, self-understanding, self-discipline, these bring us to the 5th level, which is it's got a component of it that has to do with our presence in the world, but more of it is psychological, mental, emotional. It's self-actualization. It's self-actualization, which at the very, very entry level of it is more of a psychological phenomenon than a physical phenomenon. These other ones require that we pay attention to ourself in the world, to how we relate to the world, to how we walk through the world, to the reactions that we have, to the triggers and the traumas that come our way. Self-actualization means that we have spent some significant amount of time paying attention to these first 4, to self-awareness, to self-understanding, to self-acceptance, and to self-discipline. And now through those first 4 processes, we have come to a place where we can more peacefully abide in what are called the Purusharthas, the 4 main goals of human existence. And we talked about this in previous satsangs, most definitely. There's a book in the shop that I wrote on these. The first is Dharma. Through self-actualization, we have cultivated within ourselves a greater capacity to meet our Dharma. What is our dharma? Our duty. The truth of the universe. Also sometimes called the way. And this dharma, this way of truth, is to live in such a manner that we are undistracted, undisturbed, unaffected by the world around us. Less affected by that, less distracted by that, less disturbed by that, and more present in the spiritual, the higher, I don't want to use that word either, the more profound application of our spiritual studies, which is toward compassion, love, and unity. So Dharma is the first of these Purushartha that in self-actualization we find ourselves having a real relationship with. The second is Kama. And Kama, some of you may be familiar with the Kama Sutra. It's pleasure, but it's not sexual pleasure, which is where we deviate very much so, not only in the West, but worldwide. The moment we hear pleasure, we think sexuality is it. But no, pleasure is the ability to enjoy a lived experience without the attachments of the ego. And that's on any level. It includes sexuality, but it is not sexual in nature. If you looked at it as 100%, sexuality in Kama would be less than 1%. Less than 1% of 1%. It would be the tiniest little bit in the corner. The rest of it would be the ability to enjoy this lived experience by enjoying every flower, every sunset, every sunrise, every benefit that came our way, and every detriment that came our way. And by enjoy, I don't mean saying, this is great, this is wonderful, this is absolutely okay. No, the enjoyment comes from service, from saying, this is what is happening right now. And it is giving me the opportunity to step forward in a more whole intention to serve the end of suffering, not only for myself, but for all other beings also. So we look at life and we see that not only in those easy, good, feel-good moments, but also in the most difficult of moments, there is a goodness there because it allows us to step into our intention more fully and to enjoy seeing the relief, to enjoy contributing to it. And that word enjoy is just so troublesome because it's a very egotistical word on the face of it. But the reality is this: each and every one of us experiences a certain kind of peace when we are of genuine service to other beings. And if you have any hesitation in believing that, just go out and be of service and find out what it does for you. Even if your life is the most difficult of places right now, being of service to the alleviation of suffering in others will soften your life. It will soften the harsh edges and the distress that you feel because of a difficult life. It just will. And there's no logical way to explain that. I suppose there's scientific ways, but we're not going to get into that today. No. Is all this making some sense to this point? Very good. The third of these Purushartha is Artha. And Artha is the ability to know what abundance truly is. Prior to self-actualization, we hear the word abundance and we say, oh, I can attract that wonderful Lamborghini, that model, that house, that money, that fame, that fortune. I can use spiritual skills to attract these things to myself. And we play with the concept of abundance in a very childish way. We think that it's just about attainment of things. And we think those things are going to bring us happiness and joy in this life. And so that's where we put our energy to, the attainment of more things, so that those new things can override the old things that no longer make us happy. But when we come into this fifth stage of yoga, the stage of self-actualization, what we actually understand is that abundance doesn't have all so much to do with those things. Certainly it's part of it. Just like sexuality is some very tiny little part of kama, of pleasure. Those things are some very little part of the abundance of the universe. And in fact, we come into a deeper inquiry about what that abundance really entails. The abundance of love that we are capable of, the abundance of compassion, the abundance of connection, the abundance of service, the abundance of truth. We come into that greater abundance, and the more that we come into a relationship with that abundance, the more we will tend to turn away from the other more egotistical forms of abundance. We won't see them as being so attractive or necessary. We'll be happier with less, actually. We'll want to purge our life of the things that bog us down. We'll want to simplify. And in that simplicity, we'll find amazing spaciousness within ourselves, within our life, to actually pursue the things that give us some kind of meaning, that bring us some different kind of happiness that we might not yet be able to explain, but that on some level we know we've been waiting for. We know we've been seeking and inquiring about, and yet still don't quite understand. And then the fourth is moksha. And so we pursue moksha, and that's what that little bit that we have not yet understood actually is liberation. Is what is liberation? Up until now, we've had this concept of liberation as being me as a free person in a world that makes me irritated and gives me the feeling of being bound in chains. So I get to let go of those chains and do what the heck I want to do in this life. Pursue whatever I want to pursue. I can travel to the far ends of the world. I can eat whatever food I want and never gain an ounce. I can say whatever is on my mind, no matter how irritating to you it might be, and I will receive no reprimand for it whatsoever. Up until now, pre-self-actualization, we have looked at our liberation as being largely egotistical, largely self-centered in an egotistical way. And in self-actualization, we flip that around and we recognize that there is a healthy ego, absolutely, but that most moments the ego is not so healthy, not so holistic. And we look at the liberation that lies beyond the ego. We look at the liberation that exists in peace and in peace alone. And peace is the state, the moment of being where the ego doesn't have much to do at all, if anything at all. The ego doesn't need to be involved other than to not disturb you. And that comes by way of self-discipline and self-understanding and all the other ones that came before. So these four aspects of abundance, we dive into them. We dive into them with joy, with curiosity. We dive into them with a sense of necessity also. Like, somebody's been calling me and I'm finally hearing the call. Now I have to answer it. The truth on some level has been shown to me. And because it's so very powerful in comparison to what else I've been clinging to, I now can no longer turn away from it. I have to investigate it. I have to go further with this. And that diving into the deeper end of all of this leads into self-transformation. Self-transformation is the stage of intuitive, it is initially the stage of intuitive wisdom, But then it goes beyond intuitive wisdom, because that's no longer actually needed in self-transformation. The intuition is needed in the other stages, in the earlier stages of this path. Once you get to self-transformation, there's no longer a question. There's not really a doubt to be had. Self-transformation is the transformative moment when we move from the idea of the little tiny me that is being bombarded by everything in this world and life to the transformed me, which can live in this world of disappointment and harshness and difficulty and disturbance and still be at peace. So there's no doubt there anymore. We experience an innate ability to reconcile and transcend the play of karmas. There's nothing left to do but be simple. To be simple within the pureness of our own existence. There's no longer a fear of death or dying. There's no longer a fear of the end. There's no longer a fear of not enough, a fear of lacking, none of these things. In self-transformation, these things are just about out the door. They're crossing the threshold between what I used to grasp onto as my excuse for life and the things that I am letting go of, have let go of, and watching as they move away from me. And as long as I'm in this self-transformative state, there is still always the possibility that I'll look at one thing and say, not quite yet. And then I'll go back to step one with regard to that particular thing and make my way. Because don't forget, anything that has stages is not usually, if ever, talking about everything all at once. You're, as I've said many, many times, a complicated onion. And it is possible to come into this state of self-transformation as a whole being. It is absolutely possible. But it's more likely that there's going to be some give and take depending upon how strong the pull of trauma is, how strong the pull of expectation is, how strong the past is holding, or you're holding on to the past. You may still have that back and forth a little bit. Even in the mode of self-transformation, there may still be a tendency for the gunas of nature, the passion, the lethargy, and even the balance to draw you back into previous tendencies. It's not until we get to the 7th that we actually may have surpassed even the gunas. And that is self-transcendence. Self-transcendence, the 7th of these stages of yoga, we exist only in the words of Swami Shraddhananda, as the blissful, radiant truth of the self with no deviation. We simply are that. And in that moment, there is nothing else. What that statement doesn't mean is that in the next moment, a 65-pound dog may run at top speed toward my knee and break it, causing me such excruciating pain that I flip right back into the tendencies of grasping at the intense nature of physical pain. And then that moment in that self-discipline stage becomes very much awake and aware. Do I become caught up in this pain in such a way that leads me back to my tendencies? Or do I practice what I know to be useful? The breathing, the meditation, the faith, the simplicity. The 7th stage of yoga, just because we acquire that state in a particular moment doesn't mean that in the next 5 minutes something isn't going to happen that grabs our attention and sends us reeling toward that fifth stage of self-discipline. Fourth stage. We're always being drawn back to that fourth stage of self-discipline. It's so very important. Something that will cause us to have to choose between returning to our tendencies or continuing in the state of liberation. That will always be a choice that, as long as we are embodied in a physical body, we will have to face. So we should, or we would benefit greatly by letting go of the idea that this ever gets easy. It doesn't get easy. Although the pitfalls and slippery slopes do become more obvious, the useful tools to cultivate within ourselves become more obvious. The truth becomes more obvious. And in the obvious nature of the truth of yoga, there is an ease. There is a relief to that knowing that allows us, that empowers us to make our choices more efficaciously, more eloquently, and also more immediate. Instead of mulling it over for weeks, years, days, whatever, perhaps it's just a moment or two, a minute or two, an hour or two. Our rebound is perhaps quicker in some given instances. Therein lies the ease. Not that we won't ever have to face it again, but that we will have recall to the strength of the truth versus the weakness of the ego, to the brilliance of the illuminated self versus the hazards of a self who believes that it is limited and only full of suffering and can never mean any more than that. Questions or reflections? Hi. Are there any questions or reflections? I know it was a lot. And don't forget, the recording will be up on YouTube shortly. So you can always go back and listen to it if you would like to. Yeah. We're good? I like Amber's. Amber's like, yes and no. We're good, but we're also, yeah, go ahead.
React to certain situations. Moving forward in a himsa, and you want to practice nonviolence, but also protect yourself in the world, but not harm anyone. And how do you know the right thing to do to be and being gracious in certain situations?
That's a wonderful question, and it's one that comes up an awful lot. So first of all, let's just look and understand that in our beginning practice of ahimsa, our definition of gracious may be very different than what it evolves into as our practice of ahimsa deepens. When we first start practicing ahimsa, we don't practice ahimsa necessarily for the sole benefit of ahimsa. We practice ahimsa for the sole benefit of ourself. I want to be a nicer person. I want to be a kinder person. I want people to see that I'm making the effort to be a nicer person. And we're still very vulnerable to the attitudes of other people. So if someone walked up to you today and said, Amber, you're not being, you're not really living up to that ahimsa, because if you were, you would not have said to me what you said to me. That will be a dagger to the heart. And we will become misinformed about, potentially, and to great potential, what ahimsa actually is. We will think that ahimsa rests on other people's perception of us, and even on our own perception of ourselves. It's such a slippery slope. So what we define as gracious early in our practice of ahimsa will likely change as our understanding of ahimsa grows and evolves. Ahimsa is nonviolence. That means, yes, that I will work very hard to not say or do things that intentionally hurt you. I will not throw my words at you like darts. I will not, put you in the line of fire of my actions. I will not talk with poison about you. I will not think poisonously about you. These things I will absolutely cultivate the discipline within myself to try to maintain these practices of nonviolence. But that's a two-way street, because I also, in the same moment, need to be taking the vow of, I will not empower you to throw your poison darts at me. And what that means is I will not catch them and claim them for my own. I can't stop you from saying things about me. I can't stop you from gossiping about me. But what I can do is cultivate within myself the mechanism of, I do not own your words. They don't belong to me. I do not own your actions. They do not belong to me. I do not own your intentions. I do not own you or anything you do, say, think, or intend. And so as part of the practice of ahimsa, if someone tries to throw poison darts your way, no matter how sweetly they're coated in some other substance, thank you, but that dart does not belong to me. In order for me to practice nonviolence on a deeper and deeper level, I need to allow you to take more and more responsibility for your own behavior and not give you the excuses of my own lack of self-discipline. Does that make sense? And that's probably the hardest part, that really is. Because we have a misunderstanding. We think that when we start practicing ahimsa, life's going to get easy and other people are going to practice it too. Exactly.
Get into practice.
Yeah. But when you start practicing ahimsa, actually the rest of the world becomes far more violent because you're going against the flow. You're going against the stream of what most people do. And so people are going to lash out. And the self-discipline in stage 4 supports us in being able to hold fast. No, I am not going to give in to violence. You can try to egg me on all you want. That's yours. That is what you own. I don't own that. I am just going to wish you well, not throw poison darts at you to the very best of my ability, not intend harm to you to the very best of my ability. And I'm going to take this beautiful energy, this cosmic energy that I have been given in this life, in this embodiment, and I am going to orient it toward something that matters, that makes a bigger difference than me arguing with you over who owns your words and your fears. Instead, I'm going to turn over to this side and I'm going to collect food for the hungry. Bring comfort to those who are suffering. Be quiet in meditation. Stop trying to explain myself. I learned a long time ago the value of that. You do not need to explain yourself and you do not need to explain your decisions. Because an individual, including one's own self, who is still very deeply attached to the idea of your responsibility to them will not accept your explanation as valid as long as they perceive themselves to still be suffering at your hands. Their perception of their own suffering and your role in it is not the truth. And even if you are shooting poison darts at them, their ability to say no thank you to those poison darts is their spiritual work. Yours is to say no thank you to what they throw at you. Swamiji used to say it beautifully. He said, MYOB, always mind your own business. What other people say about me is none of my business. What other people do is none of my business. What other people think is none of my business. Think about that. When you let go of the attachment you have to what other people think about you, what an intense relief that brings. What an intense relief. But letting go of what other people think about you, letting go of that is some of the hardest work you'll ever do in this life. Wish I could say it was easy, Amber, but it's not. In AA and many other addiction-oriented programs, they say, the addicted individual has to hit rock bottom. And that's the truth. And that is the truth for each and every one of us, because we are all addicted. We are addicted to the idea that someone else is responsible. That someone else's words have power over us. That someone else's expectations have power over us. And it's only when we hit absolute rock bottom, failing, I'm going to use that word, failing, to meet the expectations of another human being, that we say, the hell with expectations. There's something just not true there, because no matter how hard I try, no matter how much of myself I give over to you, no matter how much I try to change, I am still not good enough to meet your expectations. So there's a lie there somewhere. And damn it, if I'm going to continue living in that lie. The lie of that which can never be met. Someone else's egoic expectations can never be met. It is not possible. Therefore, those egoic expectations are a lie. And I don't have to live to a lie. I can choose to live to a truth instead. And of course, it's a truth that will require some digging, some sadhana practice, some beautiful spiritual inquiry. But it is so worth it. So worth it. Any other questions or reflections right now? We're good? Okay. Let's sit tall and close the eyes. Take a nice breath in and a nice breath out, and don't be afraid of the work. Don't be afraid of the letting go. Allow the courageous self to come forward. Allow the brilliant self to be the one that guides you. Allow your intention to be liberation, moksha. And see everything else as simply a stepping stone between this and that. And eventually you will become aware of the truth that this is nothing other than that. That's our next satsang. Draw the hands together in front of the heart. Lift our voices in one Om, taking a breath in. Om.